Hi, friends. Welcome to episode 25 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian for 12 years and counting, I found myself asking the question, where is the podcast that will help me do my job? I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that the ideas expressed in this podcast are my own, or when appropriate, I cite my sources. I especially want to thank the school librarians who permitted me to interview them at the MACUL conference, because for the very first time, I will be including interviews in my podcast. I would like to be especially clear that the ideas and opinions expressed by myself and my episode guests are our own and not representative in any way of our school district or employer. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. I would like to welcome all our brand new listeners. There has been a considerable spike in episode downloads this weekend. Welcome to our Canadian neighbors who today pushed Guam out of the top 4 in rankings, just ahead of our listeners in Australia and New Zealand. I welcome everyone's feedback and episode suggestions. Please email me at schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com or direct message me on Twitter or Facebook. Include your mailing address and I'll send you a podcast sticker. Be especially sure to visit the show notes today. There are resources and recommendations for everyone, regardless of your school assignment or ages of your students. The inspiration for today's episode title certainly isn't original, but I think it is accurate for all the topics which will be addressed. One of my favorite podcasts is NPR's Sam Sanders' It's Been a Minute. On his Friday weekly wrap, Sam Sanders asks his guests to describe their week in just 3 words. The 3 words that best describe my week, for so many reasons, is learn, grow, lead. No doubt you've been following the recent tragedy in New Zealand. I've done my best to keep this podcast devoid of politics. However, I am particularly tuned in to hate crimes towards Muslims, and I would like to share with you the reason why. Until I was 12, my childhood was spent living in countries where I was, in many respects, a minority. I lived in Japan, the Philippines, on Guam, and for more than 4 years in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. As a blonde-haired, green-eyed, freckled child, I was accustomed to drawing some attention while I lived abroad. More importantly, I was immersed in a variety of cultures, religious practices, and foods, and sights, and smells, and everything which was explained to me in the terms in which a child could comprehend. Amy, we are guests in this country. I understood the distinction between my summers spent living at my grandparents' home in Michigan, filled with cartoons and fast food, and where my mom could drive a car. Living in Jeddah, we had Betamax tapes, a driver, and we shopped at the souk, and my food options were very different. No bacon until we went back to the States in the summertime. I attended an American school with an array of international students. I joined the school's brownie troop, and I met scouts from all over the region. I had Arabic studies for 4 years, and we learned a few conversational phrases and all about Islam. It is impossible to extricate religion from any conversation in Saudi Arabia because it was and remains a very conservative country. Our schools closed for 2 weeks when our bus drivers were all going on the Hajj. We attended school on Saturday through Wednesday, and the muezzin call to prayer 5 times a day echoed throughout the city. It was the first and the last thing I heard every day. Where I lived was very isolated because our compound was a distance from the embassy families and those affiliated with the airlines and petroleum companies. My closest friends were Hamza, our driver, who came from Sudan, and our housekeepers, Argash and Khadija, who were from Eritrea. We only left Saudi when my local schooling options ended and boarding school was going to become necessary. We are the sum of our past experiences, and my own childhood has left me with an awareness and appreciation for the diversity of humankind. All this relates to this podcast and school librarians because I feel that we are uniquely positioned to respond in a manner which supports our students and our schools. School librarians can, in being deliberate in our purchasing, create a more diverse collection from which our students choose their books. I would go so far as to say that it is our obligation to create a collection which invites awareness and acceptance of cultures, religions, and lifestyles, inclusive and accepting not just of those in our immediate communities, but of the global community. And to that end, I would like to share 3 related resources, which I think may prove helpful. And the links will be provided in the show notes. There are 2 podcasts and a recommended book list. The first podcast is titled Lifelines, with children's authors and co-hosts Anne Braden and Saadia Faruki. This is a partnered effort. Anne conducts the interviews and Saadia offers book recommendations. According to both Anne and Saadia, quote, "In this podcast, we share conversations with librarians, educators, and readers about the children's books that can be bridges across our cultural divides, the books that can open minds, and the books that can be the lifeline a child needs to remember they are not alone." End quote. Subscribe to Lifelines on iTunes and Stitcher. You can follow Anne Braden on Twitter at Anne Braden Books, Anne, Braden Books, and Saadia Faruki at Saadia Faruqi. Be sure to check out past episodes as well as the very detailed show notes for all sorts of recommendations for your library. The second podcast recommendation is also a team effort. I've already mentioned Matthew Winner, a school librarian and the host of the Children's Book Podcast, in my February 3rd episode, Podcasts and You. In this podcast, Matthew partners up with New York Times best-selling author of the middle grade books The Vanderbeekers of 141st Street and The Vanderbeekers and the Hidden Garden, Karina Glasser, for a podcast titled KidLit These Days. Quote, "This podcast will explore how children's book authors are responding to world events, give you an inside look into authors and illustrators' creative processes, and, of course, provide you with all the children book recommendations you could ever wish for." End quote. Look for KidLit These Days wherever you subscribe to podcasts. You can also follow Matthew Winner on Twitter at Matthew C. Winner and Karina at Karina Yan Glaser. And that is spelled KarinaYanglaser. The next recommendation is 21 books you should add to your library that share Muslim voices by middle school information literacy specialist Rachel Mainero. Be sure to check out the link in the show notes. This comprehensive list includes picture books as well as middle grade and young adult. I especially find useful the descriptions of each book in this resource. Follow Rachel on Twitter at Mrs. Mainero, spelled MRSMAINERO. I would also suggest that if you're looking for a makerspace resource, to check out her Maker Idea Lab on Rachel's blog at mrsmainero.com. Before we shift gears, I would like to suggest that we take this one step further. And this is something that I am mindful because it's not enough to just say, "See, I bought these books because I want to promote diversity in my library," or insert whatever goal it is you happen to be focusing on, such as Constitution Day, Veterans Day, Black History Month, Earth Day, Green School Designation, and whatever school priorities you're trying to match. But to actually showcase these books, get them into the hands of the classroom teachers and students. It's not enough to just buy the books and have them on the shelves, but to also incorporate them into our own lessons in the library. I'm aware that I am lousy at this aspect of promotion, and it happens to be a goal of mine. I learned a very important lesson this week, and it's one which I would like to pass along. And I'm not sharing to gloat or to brag. I'm sharing this idea because it worked. And I hope, more than anything, that somebody else's library might benefit from this experience. In the past 5 years, I've not been terrifically assertive in advocating for library funding. Maybe it's because I'm overwhelmed in generating lessons or covering 4 different libraries. It is possible that I've been discouraged when I asked if I could pull some books off of last year's PTO book fair, and I was turned down. But something we should all remember when it comes to the composition of our school's PTO leadership. It evolves. As parents move on, new parents join, and in doing so, this opens up lots of possibilities. So, on March 13th, I attended a PTO meeting. I had emailed my principal and the president of the PTO in advance to let them know of my intentions. As a courtesy, I was permitted to precede the agenda items with my proposal. I gave an impassioned explanation for why I really could use some additional funding for the library. Perhaps the one thing that I said which seemed to connect with my audience went something sort of like this. When all of you walk through our library, you see beautiful new books displayed on the top of the bookshelves. You see the shelves lined with books. But then I draw the comparison to the clothes in their closet. The closet is full of clothes, but they really only use and enjoy about 20%. The remaining clothes are passed over, and while they still may fit, you have no interest in wearing any of it. And at this point, all the heads in the room are nodding in agreement. I continue. This is where I am with our library. While it may appear that we are overflowing with books, look at it with the librarian's eyes, and you'll see tired, outdated, dilapidated books your children have no interest in checking out. When I was asked how much money I was hoping to receive, I intentionally didn't specify an amount. I assured the parents that I could spend whatever their budget could accommodate. I wanted to share the most persuasive argument I heard from a parent. Her family visits the public library all the time. Her daughter is an entire grade ahead. And because we're networked with the public library, I can see that this student had 27 books currently checked out from the public library near us. Anyway, her mom knows how much her daughter loves the library and said to this group, "When we give the librarian money, it is spent in the most equitable way to fairly distribute and benefit all of our students. Just as you would buy groceries for every member of your family, the librarian is going to purchase books which serves the entire school, not just a classroom or a grade level." I did make 3 assurances to my PTO. First, I promised that I would spend this gift immediately, so as to guarantee that this year's students would have an opportunity to enjoy these titles. Secondly, that every book would have a dedication label on the inside cover. I've used the large 2x3 Avery labels, which come 10 to a page, and I'll put a school seal on there as well as an inscription that says, "Made possible through the generosity of the PTO, Spring 2019. Lastly, I would broadcast photos of the students enjoying these books on school social media. Not long after I returned home, did I get an email from the PTO president informing me that I would be allocated $1,000 to spend this year. So this week, I presented at Michigan's largest EdTech conference, MACUL, Michigan Association for Computer Users and Learning. Believe it or not, my proposal was due last July. I wrote it one evening while vacationing on the west side of Michigan in a little town called Pentwater on Lake Michigan. I attached a link to my presentation called RIP BookFlix. Now what? For listeners in Michigan, you may remember that we once enjoyed free access to BookFlix, a scholastic digital resource, which is terrific if you're working with students ages pre-K to possibly grade 2. My presentation first focused on looking for alternative funding to pay for the subscriptions you needed. I spent the majority of my presentation recommending free online resources, databases, YouTube, playlists, booktubers, as well as storytelling podcasts for young children. If you teach young fives, kindergartens, or grades 1 through 2, you might want to take a look at my presentation or even share some of the resources with your elementary teachers. Included in the show notes are also the links to the pre-conference I attended. Dr. Kristen Mattson of Future Ready Librarians fame and author of Digital Citizenship in Action gave the morning session on Future Ready Librarians and an afternoon session on Digital Citizenship. I've included the links to all her resources in our show notes. I've had an opportunity to listen to several podcast interviews with Dr. Mattson, and I highly recommend you visit her website and follow her on Twitter at Dr. K. Mattson, DrKMattson. When it comes to comprehensive resource lists, I haven't found one that can quite compare to the next resource in the show notes. Ryan Lisek's at MACUL 19 Resources is the next best thing to actually attending this conference in person. Not only did he include links to the featured speakers, but many of the sessions held throughout the 2-day conference. What I now need is a snow day just to sit and sort through all the resources which would be most useful to me. Ryan is a Michigan middle school teacher and host of My Middle Level Mind podcast, described in iTunes as, quote, "This podcast is meant to discuss the trials and tribulations of all those teachers who work with 12 to 14-year-olds on a daily basis. The podcast will feature conversations with educators who teach in the middle, strategies to use in the classroom, and oftentimes may delve into off-topic discussions. The hope is to provide listeners with an entertaining take on all things middle school." End quote. I'll provide a link to his podcast in the show notes. You can also follow Ryan on Twitter at Mr_Lisek, Lisek. And now, I'd like to feature some interviews, which I did while I was at MACUL. I consider this type of learning, which happens in between the sessions, very important. This type of learning happens when you talk to strangers or sit next to someone you don't know, and you make an effort to attend some of the social gatherings which might happen in the evening. I had a chance to interview several brave souls who entertained my request. I wanted to share with all of you, when you go to a conference, it's unlike going to be on your Facebook or you're on Twitter, but you really get to meet the people you're sitting around. And today was a long day because these were deep dives, and we sat around people, and when you had to turn and talk, you were talking to perfect strangers. And I wanted to introduce you to 2 perfect strangers I met, but I like the idea that we're going to be networking from now on because we sat together and we talked and we learned about each other, and they have some really wonderful things to share. So I'm going to introduce each of them, and I'd like to have them tell you a little bit about their library situations because it's something I've never heard before. So here we go.
Great. Hi, Amy. My name is Jamie, and I teach high school English for 2 hours of the day, and then I spend the rest of the day in the media center as media specialist. And we've just been talking a little bit about how there are challenges to that, of course, but that, as Amy put it, she asked me, would you say that you have the best of both worlds? And I looked right at her and said, yeah, I would wholeheartedly say that I feel like I do, because I get to be English teacher for part of the day and then librarian the rest of the day. And it's just really lovely. And I have my great colleague here who does the same thing at our middle school. So,
all right, let's hear from you.
Hi, Amy, I'm Kristen. And like Jamie said, I'm at the middle school. I also teach 2 hours of English a day. I have 7th grade English. And then I have the 0.6 of my day, I am in the media center as the media specialist. It is challenging. This is my first year with this dual role. And so there are times when I really have to call on my colleagues in the department. When the 6th grade English teacher brings her class down to the media center during 5th hour, and I also need to be in my classroom, sometimes we will switch roles. She will come tag team me. I will know I'm leaving them in good hands, but with an activity that I've had to lay out so that someone else can walk in, even someone who's very learned in the profession. And I cross back over to the media center. I talk to my students about whatever the topic is for the day, and then we have to kind of tag team back. So is it perfect? No. Is it rewarding still? Yes. And I've gotten really good at screencasts this year, too, because sometimes I deliver my material live part of the day, and I screencast it when I really have to be with my own students in my own classroom.
That's a fantastic combination of technology and flexibility. Wow, it's really amazing. And listening to you tell your story, it sounds like both of you have managed to find a great combination of library and classroom responsibilities. Well, thank you very much for sharing your story. I appreciate it.
I'm Lisa Brakel. and I teach for airport community schools, and I do K through 12 libraries. I have 3 paraprofessionals that are wonderful that work sort of underneath me. Even though I'm not an administrator, I do supervise their work and give them their tasks to do. And together we run the 5 libraries, K through 12, that exist in our district. So when I saw Amy today, I said, I have one thing that I would like to share that I've recently done that I thought others might be interested in. I know that I have had some Skyping experiences with authors in the past, and I've done it very selectively, and I've put a lot of planning into it and made it a big event in our district. But I host a Battle of the Books, and this is our 3rd year to do Battle of the Books. So I was looking for a way to make that a richer experience for the students, because in Battle of the Books, as maybe a lot of you are aware, you read a certain number of books and then you get quizzed on them at the battle and you see which team knows the books the best, which is fun and it's great. But I thought, I'd heard of some other people who were doing Battle of the Books in the state of Michigan that had Skyped with authors. So one day I got to work and I had a couple hours that I could play with, and I thought, I'm just going to do something really wild. So I went through our list of 10 books, and I looked for contact information for the 10 authors. And I could find contact information for 9 of them. So I sent out an email that said, we are reading your book for our Battle of the Books, and I wondered if you might be interested in Skyping with our students. I'm hoping that you would be willing to do it for free, but I do have some budget. Out of those 9 authors, I heard back from 7 of them, all who were willing to Skype with us, all who were willing to do it for free with the exception of 1. And so the one was Sarah Weeks, who wrote a book called So Be It, and it was made into a major motion picture. And she wanted $250 to Skype with us. Considering her background and her reputation, I thought that was free, considering the rest of my authors were all going to do, or I said free, I meant fair. Anyway, all the others were going to do it for free. I thought I can afford $250. So I set up with her, and then I started communicating with the other authors and got all of them scheduled except 1, still waiting to hear back from him. And so we have been able to Skype with these authors prior to our Battle of the Books competition, and my administrators thought that was great. Let me pull kids out of class for it because it had never really been done at our school before, and they thought it was really unique and interesting. And so I would like to say to everybody out there, if you've ever thought about Skyping with an author, you should try, because sometimes your dreams can come true.
Oh, thank you so much. I'll be honest, I have never tried that before. You know what? Would you let us know how that goes? Get back to me and tell me, how far into the future are you scheduling this out?
I threw that wild thing out there about 2.5 weeks ago. And we have the competition next Tuesday, and what is today? Wednesday. We're about a week from the competition, and on Friday we'll do 3 of the authors. Monday we'll do our last author, and so within 3.5 weeks, I was able to throw all that together.
Well, and it sounds like it's something that's very time-consuming, but it also sounds like you took a chance on something that might actually not pay off, and you're getting a lot back for the time that you spent, and your kids are really going to benefit from something like this. This is going to be very memorable for them.
Our first author was John David Anderson, who wrote Posted, and he was awesome. He really was able to talk. These are middle school kids, and he was able to really talk to them at their level, and he was very entertaining. And I just got an email while I was sitting at this conference from my aide, who said the superintendent had popped in and said he had just talked to a student who had told him about the Skype and how it was a lot of fun, and he really loved it, and he was looking forward to the next ones on Friday.
Well, I imagine this is going to be a great way to showcase what your library is, the way that it inspires kids to read, and it makes you look like a building leader. So win-win, right?
Yeah.
Thanks. Have a great conference, Lisa.
Thank you.
So I especially wanted to get this next interview because Rachel is a friend of mine who exemplifies the kind of librarian who takes on not only all the responsibilities entailed with running libraries, but also expands to reach the state level leadership.
So I'm a media specialist or school librarian at Portage Public Schools. I'm a elementary role, so I serve 2 elementaries. I see 31 sections a week. I'm in one building on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and the other on Tuesday and Thursday. I am in my current position. This is my 6th year there. I was in a previous district where I started as elementary, but then had a stint as a K-12 librarian too. So I've had a variety of experiences.
Cool. Tell us what got you interested in working outside of your immediate library and getting involved at the state level.
When I started in my role, I was working on my certification while being in the role. And I had a high school media specialist, a secondary person who was a great mentor, but she did not like traveling much, and I felt I really needed some other peers at the elementary level. And so I got involved in our local state association, which is MAME, Michigan Association for Media and Education, and just started to build a network there. And I've always been kind of a serving type, and so just about as soon as I got involved, I started to look for ways to volunteer within the organization, just signing up for some volunteer spots during the day, and that led, or at the conference, that led to getting networked within my region, and then getting networked on the board, and starting to fill in other positions.
What do you find most rewarding about working at the state level with the school librarians around the state of Michigan?
I find networking with colleagues at the state level, school librarians are often the only one in the building in that role. When I was a 3rd grade teacher, there were other 3rd grade teachers I could compare notes with. As a school librarian, there's no one in the building to compare notes with. So being involved in the state has really helped just my development as a professional, ideas for resources, and really as I've been involved for a long time now, my state members have really become like family, even more than just colleagues.
Can I ask, what would you recommend to somebody who's never done anything outside of their comfort zone, outside of their library? How would you recommend somebody getting involved at the state level in their respective states?
I would say just start by volunteering at some conference opportunities. There are always volunteer opportunities. Start by volunteering for something as much as 2 hours. My first volunteer position was taking photos at the conference and just submitting those photos. So something small to take photos. And then also, some people are much more introverted rather than extroverted, but I highly recommend going to some of the social events. You don't have to talk to everyone, but just make a connection with 1 or 2 people, and you start to build connections that can really impact your profession and your personal development and growth.
I really appreciate you taking some time out today. Ladies and gentlemen, she is sitting at an Ask Me station, which is positioned right outside our public transportation. So we do have the people mover exit and the elevator to compete with. But I appreciate your time, Rachel, and have a good conference. Bye-bye. I'd like to introduce you to somebody. I thought she was a school librarian. She actually has a role that is adjacent to being a school librarian. She oversees school librarians. And so her name is Amy, and I'll have her explain what she does and how she has taken that role and entered the area of state leadership. So here is Amy.
Hi, my name is Amy Durlam, and I work in St. Joseph Public Schools, and my current role is the Director of K-12 Library Media and Instructional Technology. But I am a certified media specialist in Michigan, and I worked as a middle school media specialist for about 7 years. And that role over time in my district morphed into including some instructional technology, as I think all of our media roles do now and should. And over time, our district has thankfully continued to recognize the importance of school libraries, and I have been able to expand my role as a leader in the district and work alongside now our administrative team. And we have 5 buildings, and we are fortunate to have 3 practicing media specialists. All are certified teachers. One is a certified media specialist. The other 2 are working on it, but they're phenomenal, and I love the fact that we have instructional experts in those spaces.
Can you tell me what kind of guidance what kind of role do you play when you are working with the school librarians in your district?
Well, we function as our own professional learning community. I mean, we meet on a regular basis. We talk about learning goals. We talk about curriculum. We talk about not only what we're delivering to students, but also what we are delivering to our staff. I think it's very important that the media specialists work alongside each other and with me in delivering PD. We also work closely with our technology integration folks in the district. So we really are kind of one big happy family, and it works pretty well.
Sounds absolutely magical. Can you tell me a little bit about how you have led in other ways in our field?
Well, probably not as well as I should because everyone has such limited time, but I guess I like to think that working collaboratively and trying to get more involved in MACUL with SIG Lib or SIG Lib, however you want to pronounce that. In the last couple years I joined the steering committee, and then this last year was able to be an officer, and it's helping me realize that it's important, of course, the work we do in our district, but it's also important to look beyond that and not only learn from others, but bring the good work that we're doing to a bigger level. I think that's important. I have been involved with MAME off and on. I've never held any leadership positions in MAME, but I years ago presented there. I've tried to present at MACUL, and as of late, with the changes that are coming in MACUL, I felt it was very important that librarians still have a voice in this organization, and so I have put myself out there to hopefully get on the slate for the board. And my mission, of course, would be keeping the big picture in mind, but also advocating whenever possible for the importance of libraries and school librarians.
That's really fantastic. Could you just explain for a minute what a SIG Lib or a SIG Lib is for anyone who's listening outside of the state of Michigan?
Absolutely. So MACUL, our state technology organization, has various special interest groups, and a few years ago, the librarians in Michigan were able to get a special interest group for librarians within MACUL, and so that is SIG Lib. And it's composed of primarily librarians, but of course, our job is inclusive, and we welcome anyone who has an interest in furthering school libraries.
I really appreciate you taking some time to talk to me. I hope you have a good conference.
I'd really like to thank everybody who helped make this podcast episode possible. I would like to thank everybody for listening today. If you like what you hear, please send a link to your fellow librarians, your PLN, or maybe your classmates in library school. Consider leaving a rating on Apple Podcasts, as it helps others find this podcast. And if you would like a podcast sticker, reach out to me either on Twitter, Facebook, or schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. The topic for next week's episode will be Book Bounty Hunter: Overdues, Fines, and How to Get Your Books Back. I hope you will tune in.